And this is the Moravian Church at Lower Ballinderry. Ancient Protestant Episcopal. And we're talking about founded 1457, congregation 1755. And what's that say? I don't know. European Heritage Open Day. Welcome to Ballinderry Moravian Church. And I've got Henry here, and he's going to tell me a bit about this Moravian church at Lower Ballinderry.
Just called Ballinderry.
Ballinderry, and he's also going to tell us a wee bit about who the Moravians were. So he's going to start off with that question.
Right, that's the general question we usually ask: who are the Moravians?
Yes.
Moravians started in the area which is probably present-day Czechoslovakia or the Czech and Slovak republics. Moravia, Bohemia, and Moravia.
Right.
It was part of the lands of the Habsburgs.
Right.
And our friend James I, he married his daughter, Elizabeth, to the elector of the Palatinate in Germany.
Right.
And they became king and queen of Bohemia.
Right.
Protestant king and queen of Bohemia.
Right.
And they actually, the church was already established by a gentleman called Jan Hus, pre-Martin Luther. And it became the established church in that area, Protestant church. But Jan Hus was martyred for his beliefs, burned at the stake.
Right.
And his remains were thrown in the Danube. But the church survived and became the dominant church. However,
right.
when the king and queen of Bohemia were taking up their role in Bohemia as Protestants, the Habsburgs in Vienna were not happy, and they invaded to destroy the new kingdom,
right.
the Protestant kingdom. And that was done outside Prague, the Battle of the White Mountain. And the Protestant army was defeated. And the king and queen fled into exile, and they were known, and they still find in history, as the Winter King and the Winter Queen.
Right.
And easy way to remember, she was Charles I's sister. So she'd been the aunt of Charles II. Easy way to remember her. So unfortunately then the church then suffered a period of persecution, and its original homeland was effectively destroyed, and they fled then, remnants fled over the border and ended up in a place in Germany, in Saxony, called Herrnhut.
Right. So this is almost similar to what happened to the Huguenots. I mean, they were persecuted out of Brittany and northern France, yeah. and they came across to UK. So
and Ireland.
So the Moravians stopped off. They were persecuted in their homeland of Czechoslovakia and then round there, and they came to Germany. You say
Germany,
and they stopped off in Germany
and on the estate of a gentleman called Count Nicholas von Zinzendorf.
So we're talking about
protection.
We're talking about what?
Couple of years.
And
they exist
tens of thousands here, or would it have been?
The church was a predominant church at the time, but by the time there was only a few left, few scattered, what they called the seeds.
So we're talking about hundreds then?
Yes, at the most.
Right, right.
Okay.
So what happened after?
So they got the Zinzendorf estate. He gave them protection.
Right.
He was a councillor to the famous Augustus the Strong, the Elector of Saxony.
But you know your history.
Yes, famous for it.
And he's more famous, if you remember, because he started the Meissen porcelain factory. And Mike porcelain then was called white gold, and he wore his expensive than gold articles. Anyway, that's beside the point.
Right.
He gave them protection.
Right.
And they re-established themselves, and he became their leader.
Right.
What happened then, they became a missionary church.
Right.
They decided they would spread the word from Herrenhout across the continent. And two, for instance, walked from Saxony to Copenhagen. And from Copenhagen, they set out by ship to the Danish West Indies. It's a thing we forget about, but Denmark did own colonies in the West Indies. And in 1917, they actually just sold them to America. The islands, the people, the whole lot, just sold them off to the States. But they went on the condition that they were only allowed to live with the slaves. So that put most other people off. So these two white men had to live with the slaves and give the message to them, aside from the white ruling class.
So that would have been unheard of, living with the slaves, you know, because
it
of...
was a very great demarcation between them.
Because there would
You're
have
a
been...
slave owner, they were your possessions.
That's right.
These two men were on the same level as the slaves, although they were white.
But,
Now, I'm using those terms white and black in the connotation
yes,
all the time.
yes, that would have been unheard of to do that.
Totally unheard of. But then, in a way, it worked in the long-term benefit of the church.
Yes, of course it did.
Because when the church started to fade after the Second World War in the UK, the immigration from the Caribbean brought a lot of Moravians from the Caribbean into the UK.
Right.
And our London congregations were revitalised by these Moravians coming from the West Indies, especially Jamaica and those countries.
Oh, so that would have been what?
Round in a full circle.
In the 1930s, would it?
1950s.
50s?
Whenever the Caribbean people started to come into the UK.
And they were Moravians coming from the Caribbean.
Come back
Oh my goodness.
into the UK.
Wow.
So we were actually founded here by a chap called John Sennick.
Right,
He came as a missionary from England to Dublin.
right.
And he walked from Dublin here to Ballinderry.
That's a right wee tramp.
Sometimes he did it if you shared a horse. One person sit on the horse, ride so far, tie the horse up, and then you tramped along and you got on the horse, you had to ride the horse, and then you left it off, and that's the way you broke the journey.
Right.
It usually took him about 2 days to walk from Dublin.
My goodness.
We had a big presence in Dublin. Unfortunately, the Methodists and us didn't get on, although we inspired the Methodism.
Right.
And what they did was they bought the lease of the church premises and evicted us from our premises in Dublin.
That was nice of
Long
them.
since forgiven John Redford for that.
That was nice of them.
That was nice of them. So this congregation was founded in 1755.
Right.
And it had originally been on the lands belonging to the Hertford family. Now, they were actually granted these lands at the time of the plantation of Ulster. So you have this, and they were descended from Seymours, and that was, you'll come across them when you're dealing with Henry VIII and his wives.
Yes, Jane Seymour.
Yeah, that's the lady. But then the lands became separated because the illegitimate son of the head of the family was Sir Richard Wallace of Wallace Collection in London, Wallace High School.
Yes, yes. Yes, yes. Yes, yes.
He was illegitimate, and he was granted the lands because they were kept from the English estates, and his father, the Marquis, granted him the lands.
Right.
So we rented eventually from him, but he actually gave us the ground eventually, mainly because we were always in debt.
Right.
And the estate office in Lisburn, somebody had to go and complain that we couldn't pay the rent. But eventually he gave us the land.
Yes.
So this is where we were established here. Normally it would have been the ladies and gentlemen would have lived, ladies would have worked making this type of christening robe, and they were taking orders for that. Workmanship is absolutely exquisite, and that brought revenue in. The men would have worked in the land, and then eventually the single sisters then, as they were called, went to live at Grace Hill up in Ballina. And how to do that, I'll give you an idea of the road system. They crossed the loch. It was easy to go across Loch Nay and then up to Ballina. Unfortunately, the boat sprang a leak and they had to throw everything overboard except the sisters. They eventually got there safely, but all the cargo went overboard. So then it just became, if you like, an ordinary church at that point.
This separation you're talking about of men and women, and the clothing here would remind me of Amish.
Well, they had the ladies wore distinctive clothing. They would have had a black skirt, white blouse, and bonnet. Now the ribbons on the bonnet, various colours. Black would have been, of course, for a widow.
Right.
White would have been for a young girl, of course.
Right.
Pink, I think, was for a girl of marriageable age, and blue was for a married lady.
Right.
The various bonnets.
Right.
But that died out some considerable time ago.
So you knew not to cast your eye on a lady wearing a blue ribbon on her bonnet because she was married.
Yes. Well, it depends how attractive the widow might have been.
You're not allowed to say that.
Don't get the poor widows up altogether.
Oh, dear. Oh, which one was the married one? The blue ribbon, that's right. Right, okay. So we're now at, what, 1755 or
Yes, and
thereabouts?
coming on, the church was originally built, Seneca except they actually nearly built the church themselves, the congregation. Now it's built of stone and brick, although it's cladded outside. But the brick is just handmade brick, locally made. Unfortunately, in the 1830s was a fire, and the whole complex was destroyed, just because it was a thatch building.
Yes.
The thatch building, the whole, was notorious for fires.
Of course it
was
would.
rebuilt. Now, this side of the church inside, those windows are different length to those windows on the outside.
Right.
So there's fake windows along that bottom. It was probably to utilise as much of the building that was left as possible. Okay? So originally it would have been just a round earth floor, lit by candlelight,
Right.
and benches.
Yes.
Okay? The Ordnance Survey at the time, the 1830s, actually measured the number of benches, estimated the width of a person across their bottom, and calculated it held 120 people. That's how they did it.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Then in the 1900s, early 1900s, you can still see the difference between this
Yes.
and that.
Yes. Different
These
wood.
were installed,
Right.
okay, and the new pulpit area was put in. A door at the top that doesn't actually go anywhere,
Right.
because you can see the various floor levels.
Right.
And the vestry next door. Plasterwork was inserted at that time, and then the church has been basically, that's a core of the church from that point.
Right.
Some of the original glass is still there because you can see how it's spun, because you couldn't make glass in big sheets. So you spun it as far as you could get it and then cut squares out of it. And that's why you get those. The pulpit was a later insertion, and the organ is from Dublin. It's the most superb small instrument. Now, years ago, we used to have a barrel of turf beside it. The purpose of that was to absorb the damp.
Right.
So near the rock.
Right. Yes.
It was brought up to Lisburn and brought by horse and cart from Lisburn. And they spent, I think, 30 shillings to entertain all the visitors on the day the organ was first played and the church was opened. So we really went mad, 30 shillings, but...
So that organ has been here since what's it?
1850s.
1850s, and is it still operational?
Oh, yes.
Right.
And it is a superb organ.
And it's one of the best in the
But
whole
that sort of little compact organ, it's one of the very best.
in the whole of Ireland, would
Of
you say?
Northern Ireland,
Of
yes.
Northern Ireland, right?
She used to make those as well, actually, for domestic purposes, about that size.
Right.
There used to be one in the hall of Hillsborough Castle.
Right.
And
right.
I tell you who collected them was Lord Dunleith, the late Lord Dunleith from Ballywalter Park.
Aye,
He had a lovely collection, and he came here one day and he played the organ.
along with all his cars as well.
Yes, he was.
He was-
he was very friendly to Lord O'Neill up at Change Castle.
Right.
Lord O'Neill was here one day, our 250th anniversary. He came